Well, nearly every project we're doing now is stereo. There are two types of stereo. There's stereo where it's shot or set with stereo, and the stereo where we are preparing stuff for post-processing at another company or sometimes internally, and but the material that was originally shot was mono. Um, when on a project where that was shot in stereo on set, uh, we get two streams of images. We track both, so we have two cameras, and we incorporate those as a stereo camera. And with a little bit of cleanup on where how the cameras are related to each other, that just passes through. We we then treat that stereo camera identically to a mono camera. Our pipeline now supports both, so that passes through to animation and lighting as the stereo camera, and they do their renders in stereo. And once we'd set up that stereo camera and the ability to pass it through the pipeline, then really people's workflow didn't change that much. They were just viewing things in stereo at the end. We have some desktop workstations with stereo, and we also have a stereo screening theatre, but that's just buying the technology. Really, in terms of workflow, it's the same. There's a bit more things going on where we're generating the camera itself, where the work was shot in mono, because then, as well as doing our animation, at the same time we're also refining a camera and with feedback from the director, we're deciding how big a stereo effect you want on different shots and where the characters lie in relation to the screen. So that does add some complexity to the animation process, because as well as the characters, you've also got this camera work that you're additionally doing at the same time, and the way that the camera work interacts with the animation work does add some complexity. There's also sometimes there's a number of cheats that you can do in the monofilm that just don't really work for stereo. Things like just doing little tweaks to the sizes of characters in the comp, shrinking them a bit, growing them a bit, either don't work or they are a lot more effort in a stereo feature, because if you just scale things down, then they're not in the same position on screen. They're not in relation to depth of each other, so that you start seeing them move about a bit, and the eye lines maybe don't match up anymore, even though they do. They'll line up with the left eye, but then they won't line up with the right eye. So you'll see those kind of cheats. So the animation tends to need to be a little bit stronger, and the lighting tends to need to be a little bit better, because little paint fixes that you would have done are a bit harder if you've got to paint both eyes to match. So it puts a bit more emphasis on the original 3D animation and 3D lighting, and it takes a little bit of that paint work out of 2D work at the end. I think we're all still learning about stereo. No, there are very few people who can say they've done 3 or 5 stereo feature films, and I think that in 10 years' time people will look back at work that we consider to be great stereo work now, and they'll think it's a bit iffy. In the same way that if we go back 15 years to VFX work, it was great at its time, but now it's the level of we'd see higher standards of quality in commercials now. It will be the same thing with stereo. As people learn more, we're all learning, and we're all quite happy with the results that we're getting. But I think that in 5 or 10 years' time, if we're still interested in stereo, then what we're doing now will look quite basic. I came into the business a bit by accident. I was working as a maths research associate at University College London, and I was on a 3-year grant there, and my research grant was coming to an end, and academic positions weren't that easy to find at the time, so I started looking around for a non-academic job, And I went to various agencies and had various interviews with some oil companies, some hi-fi companies, and a film company. And they had just had a mathematically minded uh, person leave, so they were looking for somebody with a strong maths background. And I'd done lots of high dimensional geometry as part of my thesis and then research afterwards. So I had a similar skill set, and but I knew absolutely nothing about film, and it sounded like an interesting field to work in, and so I went that way and went into film really sort of by accident. It was that or nuclear power stations, actually. Um, so then I started out in a research department doing R&D and doing some shading work, and then I did some more production-based shading work, and then I sort of shifted between lighting and shading and software development and pipeline work ever since. Um, and also some infrastructure things with render farms and boring things like that. So yes, so then it's just been a case of moving up within that, and yes, I've ended up running an R&D group and now running the 3D department at Rising Sun. Well, going back a long way, working on Gladiator was very exciting at the time. It was the first time I worked with a really big name director, Ridley Scott, and the film worked out really well and was very successful and won the Oscar, which was very exciting, particularly when you're starting out and you think you're going to win them every time after that. But more recently, working on David Jones's Moon film, whereas I think we got great results out of that. It's quite a low budget. We had to be quite clever in the way that we did lighting on that show, a lot of interiors and quite subtle lighting, but I think it was a very successful project, and I really enjoyed the results and really enjoyed the film. We've got quite a few big projects in the pipeline. There's some within the studio. During the Harry Potter films and up till a year or so ago, we were mostly doing films with one or two CG characters in, or in a background. And over the last year, we've started doing some projects with relatively modest shot counts of 60 or 100 shots, but they're a lot more complex. And what we've got in the pipeline are a couple of projects that we're hoping will be finalised soon, where we will be dealing with very large number of shots and very large number of assets at the same time. So that we'll have to up our game a bit for that as well, and really make our tools robust so that we can deal with shows with 800 or 900 shots on them, and deal with the staffing levels and the amount of data management that will be incorporated with that, but do it in a way so that the artists don't know it's there. So that they don't become data wranglers, so that they can easily find out what is going on their shot, what the right cameras are, what the right animation is, even if they're having to deal with 8 or 10 characters and a bigger environment. I think really it's there are a number of specialisation. A lot of the big studios now are getting more and more specialised. It used to be that you started out, you could do a bit of modelling, a bit of animation, a bit of texturing, a bit of effects work, a bit of shading, a bit of lighting, and do all of them. And now with modern pipeline, it's much more pipeline driven these days, and so people are specialised much earlier, I think. So I would look at really what area really excites you and really concentrate on that, and put together, particularly if you're still thinking about putting together demo reels, put together a few high quality pieces rather than trying to do everything, and really look at the specifics of what you're doing. So if you're doing combustion, really look at different sorts of flames and do demos of that, rather than trying to do flames and buildings blowing up and tornadoes and weather. Really just have a specialisation and do that exceptionally well.